The great hall of Crescent Moon Pack shimmered with lantern light, golden flames reflected in polished stone floors. Along the high walls, banners embroidered with the silver wolf crest swayed gently, catching in the current of murmured voices. The pack had gathered in its entirety, warriors in ceremonial armor, elders in their robes, pups squirming against their mother's skirts. Tonight was historic. Tonight the crown would pass. Derek stood among them, tall and broad-shouldered, a figure who should have commanded presence, but instead drew little more than sideways glances. He clasped his hands behind his back, nails digging crescents into his palms, and forced himself to hold steady as he watched his younger brother step forward. Elias, only 19, radiated dominance. The glow of his wolf spirit shimmered in his aura, thick and powerful, almost palpable in the air. The elders moved reverently, lifting the ancient crown carved of silver and etched with runes from their ancestors. The same crown that had passed from alpha to heir for centuries. Tradition said it should be Derek. He was the firstborn, the eldest, raised from birth with the weight of the pack's future pressed into his bones. But tradition bent under truth. The truth was that Derek had no wolf. The crown settled onto Elias's dark curls, and the hall erupted in a thunderous cheer. The sound rang in Derek's ears, each roar of pride a reminder of what he had failed to become. He forced his lips into a smile and clapped, though his heart twisted painfully in his chest. His mother's gaze found him from across the hall, soft and wet with sympathy. His father's jaw was set like stone, his nod to Derek both proud and regretful. They loved him, he knew they did, but even love could not silence the whispers. Still no wolf. 21 and empty. Broken alpha. Derek had heard it all. He had lived it for years. The memory of his 19th birthday still haunted him. He had waited under the full moon with every nerve trembling, expecting the fire, the crack of bones, the arrival of the beast within. But dawn came and nothing happened. Weeks stretched into months, elders whispering prayers, healers checking his blood, his aura, anything for answers. By 21, the truth was undeniable. His wolf was silent, and so Elias wore the crown. Derek told himself it didn't matter. He told himself he was happy for his brother. And perhaps, if not for Abel, he could have believed it. Abel had been his anchor in the storm, the single light in a world that had begun to turn cold. With hair as pale as frost and silver-gray eyes that seemed lit from within, he was beauty incarnate, desired by every unmated wolf in the pack, and yet for 2 years he had chosen Derek. Derek thought he had been blessed, that even if he could not be alpha, the moon goddess had still given him love. But that night in the gardens proved him wrong. The lanterns had been extinguished, leaving only the moonlight spilling across Abel's face. He stood with his hands clasped before him, shoulders tense, eyes darting away from Derek's. "Derek?" Abel said quietly, his voice breaking the silence like a knife. "This isn't working." The words landed like a blow to Derek's chest. He swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" Abel's lips trembled. "I don't think we're compatible. We've tried, but you know how people talk. You know what they say. You deserve someone who—" "Stop!" Derek's voice cracked. He knew. Of course he knew. He had always known this day might come. Abel was the most sought-after Omega in the Crescent Moon Pack. Beautiful, powerful, beloved. And Derek was an heir with no wolf. His throat burned, but he forced the question. "Is there someone else?" Abel hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Derek closed his eyes, inhaled sharply, and nodded. "I see." There was nothing more to say. The next day, Elias announced his mate. The pack gathered again in the hall, though the air was lighter this time, filled with cheer instead of ceremony. Elias beamed as he spoke. "The moon goddess has blessed me," he declared. "I have found my mate." And then Abel stepped forward. Derek's blood ran cold. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Abel walked to Elias's side, pride shining in his silver eyes, his fingers intertwining with Elias's without hesitation. The hall erupted in applause, cheers, blessings. The people rejoiced for their alpha and his chosen. But Derek's world cracked open. He stood frozen, breath trapped in his throat, his heart clawing painfully against his ribs. Abel avoided his gaze, but Derek didn't need to see his eyes to know the truth. He had been replaced. No, he had been forgotten. Betrayal tasted bitter on his tongue. From then on, the whispers grew louder. No longer hushed, no longer cautious. With Elias crowned and Abel at his side, Derek's existence was reduced to a shadow, a reminder of what the pack would rather forget. And so he made his choice. "I'm leaving," Derek told his parents weeks later, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. His mother's hand flew to her lips. "Derek!" "Only for a short while." His father silenced her with a look, then turned to his son. There was sorrow in his eyes, but also something else. Something like relief. "If that's what you want," he said simply. Derek nodded. He had expected no fight, no plea for him to stay. He packed lightly, just a satchel with clothes, a blade, and the last of his savings. At dawn, the gates of Crescent Moon creaked open. His mother wept silently. His father clasped his shoulder, strong but distant. Elias did not come to see him off. Abel did not either. As the gates closed behind him, Derek did not look back. The road stretched endlessly, carved into the earth by generations of paws and boots. Derek walked it alone. The weight of his satchel bit into his shoulder, and the silence pressed harder than the physical burden. He had thought leaving would feel freeing. Instead, the emptiness of the woods beyond the packlands seemed to echo his own hollow chest. Crescent Moon territory was lush and fertile, safe under the protection of its warriors. Beyond its borders, however, the air shifted. The trees grew older, darker, their roots like twisted fingers reaching for him. Wolves were not welcome here. His kind had learned long ago to keep to their lands. But Derek was no longer truly of his kind. He stopped once to drink from a stream. The water was sharp with cold, cutting through the fog in his mind. When he glanced at his reflection, it was the same face he'd always known. Broad shoulders, dark hair, piercing eyes that marked him as alpha blood. He looked every inch the heir he was born to be. But there was nothing behind his eyes. No golden wolf gleam, no promise of power. Just empty. His jaw clenched. If I am not Wolf, then what am I? The question haunted him as he walked. Days passed. Villages blurred into one another. Farmers and travelers gave him wary glances. Wolves did not often wander without a pack. Derek kept his head down, taking work where he could. Hauling wood, guarding merchant wagons. Even these simple tasks felt like a small rebellion against the whispers that had followed him back home. At night, though loneliness gnawed at him, packs were meant to be family, to share bonds so deep even silence carried comfort. He had none of that now. The quiet was a void. Sometimes he dreamed Abel's silver eyes stared at him in the dark. Sometimes he saw Elias lifting the crown with a proud smile. Derek would wake with his chest tight, gripping the earth beneath him, trying to shake off the ghost of what he'd lost. The worst part was the anger. It simmered in his gut, unrelenting. Not at Abel, not at Elias, at himself, at his broken body, his empty soul. If the moon goddess had abandoned him, then what was left? One evening, the sky bruised with storm clouds, Derek took shelter in the ruins of an old watchtower. It stood crooked against the horizon, its stones crumbling with age. As he lit a small fire, the hairs on the back of his neck prickled. He wasn't alone. He stilled, listening. No crack of twigs, no shuffle of paws. Just the faintest whisper of movement, like silk brushing stone. Lost little wolf. The voice was smooth, low, and cold. It slid over his skin like shadow. Derek shot to his feet, his hand going to the dagger at his belt. His eyes darted across the ruin, but he saw nothing. A chuckle echoed, deep and resonant. No need for blades. You could never touch me with steel. Something moved in the corner of his vision. He turned and then froze. The figure emerged from the shadows as if they bent to obey him. Tall, elegant, draped in black that flowed like liquid, The stranger's presence filled the tower with suffocating weight. His skin was pale as marble, his hair dark as midnight, and his eyes, Derek's breath caught, were crimson. A vampire. Derek had heard stories all his life. Blood drinkers, predators, enemies to wolves since time immemorial. Packs trained for centuries to keep them at bay. Yet none of those tales had prepared him for the sheer gravity of this one's presence. The vampire's lips curved in a slow smile, revealing the faintest glint of fangs. "You smell different," he murmured, tilting his head as though studying prey. "Wolf, but not wolf. How curious." Derek's hand tightened on his dagger. "Stay back." "Or what?" The vampire moved closer, each step deliberate. His voice was a purr, dangerous and hypnotic. "You'll bare your teeth? Shift into that beast you don't have." The words struck like a slap. Derek stiffened, anger burning behind his ribs. The vampire stopped just a pace away, so close Derek could feel the unnatural chill rolling off him. His crimson eyes glowed faintly in the firelight. Then, slowly, he leaned down until his lips brushed Derek's ear. "We are going to have so much fun." The whisper was velvet and iron all at once. Derek's breath hitched, his body torn between the instinct to fight and the unexplainable pull that rooted him to the spot. The vampire drew back just enough for their eyes to lock. "My name is Luther, and you, Broken Alpha, you belong to me now." Derek's pulse thundered in his ears. The dagger in his grip felt suddenly useless, a child's toy in the face of the being before him. Luther did not move, not quite. He only watched, crimson eyes gleaming as though he were amused by Derek's fear. No, not fear. Derek corrected himself harshly. He wasn't afraid. He was angry. He was furious at the way the stranger spoke, at the gall of being called mine. "Belong to you?" Derek spat, forcing steel into his voice. "I belong to no one." The vampire's smile deepened. "Bold. I like that." He circled slowly, like a predator drawing out the moment before striking. "But boldness without teeth is nothing. You cannot bite, wolf. You cannot even howl." Heat flared in Derek's chest. His grip on the dagger tightened, and in one sharp movement he lunged. Steel flashed, aimed for Luther's throat. The blade met nothing but air. In the space of a heartbeat, Luther was behind him, cold fingers brushing his wrist. "Predictable," he murmured against Derek's ear. Then, with effortless strength, he twisted, and the dagger clattered to the ground. Derek whirled, chest heaving, fury burning hotter than humiliation. "Kill me then," he snarled. "If that's what you want, get it over with." For the first time, Luther's smile faded. His gaze softened, though the intensity in his eyes never dimmed. "Kill you?" He shook his head slowly, as though Derek had spoken nonsense. "No, Wolf. I am not here to end you." His pale fingers ghosted against Derek's jaw, making the alpha stiffen. "I am here to claim you." Derek jerked back, fire flashing in his eyes. "I'm not some omega for you to collar." Luther chuckled, low and rich, like velvet soaked in wine. "Oh, I know exactly what you are. Or rather, what you are not." The words cut sharper than claws. Derek's stomach twisted, but he forced himself to meet that crimson gaze. "Say it." "You are a broken alpha," Luther whispered. "A leader without a wolf. A man born to rule yet stripped of the one thing that makes your kind whole. Tell me, Derek." He leaned in, his cold breath ghosting across Derek's lips. "Doesn't it hurt? To be less than everyone else?" The answer ripped from Derek before he could stop it. "Yes." His voice cracked, raw and desperate. His fists clenched helplessly at his sides. "It kills me every damn day." Silence fell heavy between them. Then Luther's smile returned, not mocking this time, but darkly satisfied. "Good," he said softly, "because I can give you what your goddess denied." Derek's heart stumbled. He searched the vampire's face, uncertain if he was hearing a threat, a promise, or madness. "And why would you do that?" Luther's crimson eyes burned with something unfathomable. "Because you are mine." Derek wanted to scoff, to push him away, to run until the forest swallowed him whole. But he didn't move. He couldn't. Luther's words wrapped around him like chains, terrifying yet strangely grounding. For years he had felt like nothing, no one. And here stood a monster from whispered nightmares, looking at him as though he were precious. It made no sense. You think you can fix me? Derek's voice was quieter now, bitter. You think you can make me what I'm not? Not fix, Luther corrected smoothly. Transform. Derek's breath hitched. Transform into what? The vampire only smiled, sharp and secretive. Into what you were always meant to be. Before Derek could respond, the fire sputtered. A wind surged through the ruined tower, extinguishing the flames, plunging them into darkness. Derek's instincts screamed at him to move, but then Luther's cold hand brushed his, steady and unyielding. And for the first time in years, Derek didn't feel hollow. The firelight returned only when Luther willed it. A spark danced on his fingertip, no ordinary flame, but a living ember the color of blood. Crimson, molten, impossible. It pulsed like a heartbeat before leaping back into the blackened hearth, sending shadows clawing across the ruined stone walls. Derek's breath caught. He clenched his jaw until it ached, forcing the awe back down into the pit of his stomach. Vampires should not have been able to summon flame. That was witchcraft, an ancient gift carried only in bloodlines touched by the moon or blessed by the elements. Wolves spoke of fire as sacred, dangerous, divine. To see a vampire cradle it like a toy, it shattered everything Derek thought he knew. Luther, of course, looked as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He sank gracefully onto a toppled stone pillar, movements fluid, deliberate. One leg crossed casually over the other, his pale hand resting on his knee. The ruin looked abandoned, forgotten by time, but in Luther's presence it felt claimed. The air itself seemed to bend around him, as though the night preferred him to its own darkness. His crimson eyes never wavered. They burned against Derek's skin like a brand. You wonder why I care, Luther said at last. His voice was smooth, unhurried, as if he had eternity to wait for Derek's reply. Why a creature like me bothers with a broken alpha? The word broken scraped against Derek's pride. He bristled, shoulders tightening, but his throat locked. Silence was safer than revealing how much those words sank in. I'll tell you why, Luther continued, leaning forward slightly. His gaze sharpened like a blade honed against stone. Because power recognizes potential, even when it lies dormant. Your pack saw emptiness. I see hunger. And hunger, Derek, is worth more than 1,000 crowns. The words struck something deep, something raw. Derek folded his arms tightly across his chest, as if to hold the pieces of himself together. You talk as though you know me. A faint smile curved Luther's lips, elegant and cruel all at once. I do. His voice softened, almost gentle. I know what it is to be bound by expectation, to be raised in chains disguised as honor, to be told, from the moment you draw breath, what you must become. And then, his eyes darkened, to discover that no matter how you bleed for it, you will never be enough. Derek's composure faltered. He hadn't expected that. He had braced for mockery, manipulation, but not recognition, not understanding. Luther's gaze softened, just slightly, like storm clouds parting for the briefest flicker of moonlight. Wolves worship their goddess. You prayed for a wolf and she denied you. You begged her for purpose, and she answered with silence. But he spread his hands, elegant fingers cutting through the dim glow of firelight. I offer no prayers. I take what I desire, and I will teach you to do the same. Derek barked a laugh, harsh and jagged. And what? Sell my soul in return. Luther rose slowly, like shadows gathering into form. Each step closed the distance between them until Derek could feel the cold aura rolling off him, seeping beneath his skin. He wanted to back away. His body screamed to run, but his pride rooted him in place. No, Luther whispered. His voice was silk stretched over steel. Not sell. Trade. Choose. Derek's throat tightened. The weight of crimson eyes bore into him, stripping away his defenses. His heart hammered like a trapped animal against his ribs. Still, he forced himself to meet Luther's gaze, refusing to bow. "And what exactly is your bargain?" Pale fingers lifted, ghosting across Derek's chest, right above his pounding heart. The touch was cool, but it seared all the same. "I will give you strength," Luther murmured, his tone low and intimate, a confession and a promise in one. "I will give you fire where your goddess left only ash. And in return—" His lips brushed dangerously close to Derek's ear as he finished. "You will be mine, not by blood, not by collar, but by will." The words rolled through Derek like thunder, shaking the foundations of his soul. Every lesson, every tradition, every law screamed in protest. Wolves did not kneel to vampires. They were mortal enemies, the eternal clash of predator against predator. And yet, the hollow ache inside him pulsed, a gnawing emptiness that had never left since the night he should have shifted. That void whispered temptations now. To be more. To finally belong to something, even if it was not the pack. To silence the pitying glances, the quiet sneers. "What would you make me?" Derek forced the words out, barely more than a rasp. "Something new." Luther's eyes glowed, molten and hungry. Neither wolf nor vampire. Greater than both. Whole. Derek narrowed his eyes, though his resolve wavered. "Why me?" For the first time, Luther's smile faltered. A shadow crossed his expression, some ancient sorrow flickering in his gaze. It was gone as quickly as it came, but Derek had seen it. "Because," Luther said quietly, almost reverently, "you are the only one who has ever looked at me without fear." The silence that followed pressed heavy on Derek's chest. His breathing turned ragged, uneven. His thoughts spun like leaves in a storm, torn between instinct and temptation. At last, he stumbled back a step, breaking the invisible tether between them. He shook his head sharply. "I don't trust you." Luther inclined his head as if in approval rather than offense. "Good. Trust makes men blind. Keep your doubt, wolf. But remember this, your goddess has given you nothing. I offer everything. When the emptiness becomes too heavy." His crimson gaze flared brighter, igniting like molten fire. "You will seek me out." And then, like mist dissipating into the night, Luther was gone. The shadows folded around him until nothing remained but the lingering scent of smoke and iron. The fire still crackled in the hearth, steady and alive, but its warmth felt distant. Derek sank onto the cold stone, burying his face in his hands. His body shook, not from fear, but from the storm inside him. Rage, confusion, longing he dared not name. The bargain clung to him like a curse, poisonous and tempting in equal measure. And for the first time, Derek wondered if damnation might feel like salvation. Derek did not sleep that night. He wandered until the trees thinned, until the familiar scent of crescent moon's borders wrapped around him like chains. His feet carried him back out of instinct, though every part of him wanted to turn away. By dawn, he had slipped through the patrol lines without a sound, avoiding the wary eyes of wolves who once called him Alpha to be. The pack house loomed ahead, proud and stately against the rising sun. It should have felt like home. Instead, Derek only felt the weight of every memory pressing down on him. The training fields where he once sparred beside his brother. The wide halls where whispers had followed him. Still no wolf? A shame, really, until they turned into silence heavy with disappointment. He hesitated at the door, his hand lingering on the polished wood. For a moment he almost turned away, but the ache in his chest dragged him forward. He needed something, familiarity, even if it cut him open. Inside, the house buzzed with life. Wolves moved in purposeful strides, their energy sharp and restless. At the heart of it all was Adrian, his younger brother, newly crowned Alpha. His presence filled the room, steady and commanding in a way that used to belong to Derek in dreams that would never come true. Elias turned at once, sensing Derek's arrival. His eyes softened just slightly. "You're back." Derek nodded stiffly. The air between them was tight, filled with unspoken truths. Elias's tone was even, but the undercurrent of concern didn't escape Derek. "Where were you?" Derek hesitated. His mind flashed with crimson eyes, fire that was not fire, whispers that promised everything. He swallowed hard. "Around." Adrian studied him, searching for cracks in the answer. Derek forced his face into stone. "Be careful," Elias said finally. His gaze sharpened, alpha to subordinate. "The woods aren't safe after dark. There are whispers of movement beyond the border. Rogues, maybe worse." Derek almost laughed. Worse was already here, haunting him in firelit ruins. Instead, he simply murmured, "I'll keep that in mind." But the words were hollow. His mind was already far from Crescent Moon. That night, Derek found himself standing in front of a mirror, staring at his reflection. The same dark hair, the same storm-gray eyes, the same broad shoulders that should have carried the weight of a pack. And yet no wolf stared back at him from beneath the surface. Just emptiness. He pressed his palms against the glass, breath fogging the cold surface. Luther's voice curled through his head like smoke. "The goddess has given you nothing. I offer everything." Derek squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head violently. "No," he muttered. "No." But the ache remained. And somewhere, in the shadows just beyond the window, crimson eyes gleamed, watching, waiting. Sleep eluded Derek. He lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling beams while the rest of the packhouse settled into silence. The steady rhythm of life beyond his door, footsteps, voices, laughter, faded until only his own heartbeat filled the room. Slow, heavy, restless. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw fire, crimson instead of gold, burning in a pale hand that should not have held it. He heard that voice, velvet and shadow, promising him everything he was denied. He turned over with a groan, dragging a hand through his hair. "Get out of my head." But Luther did not leave. The air shifted, subtle at first, just a whisper of coolness brushing across his skin. Then the scent of smoke and iron curled into the room. Derek's body went rigid. He sat up sharply, still awake. The voice came from the corner, smooth and amused. Derek's gaze snapped to the darkness near the window, and his breath caught. Luther stood there, crimson eyes gleaming faintly, his presence swallowing the shadows around him. He might have been carved from the night itself. Derek's fists clenched around the sheets. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Checking on you," Luther said simply, stepping forward. His movements were fluid, unhurried, as though this intrusion were his right. "You looked restless." Derek's pulse spiked, though whether from fear or fury, he couldn't tell. "You shouldn't be here." "If Adrian," Luther cut him off with a low chuckle. "Your brother sleeps deeply. I doubt he would hear even if you screamed." The words sent a shiver racing down Derek's spine. He hated how his body reacted, tight with anticipation, even as his mind screamed for control. Luther stopped at the edge of the bed, towering over him. "Still, you haven't screamed," he murmured, tilting his head. "Why is that, Derek?" Derek swallowed hard. "Because I'm not afraid of you." The smile that curved Luther's lips was slow, dangerous. "Liar." Before Derek could retort, Luther leaned closer. His cold hand cupped Derek's jaw, tilting his face upward. The touch burned in its own way, sending sparks of sensation skittering through Derek's veins. "You pretend," Luther whispered. "You hold your silence, wear your armor, and tell yourself you are stone. But I see the truth. You ache. You hunger." Derek's breath came fast, shallow. His heart thundered so loudly he was sure Luther could hear it. "And you think you can fix me?" No, Luther's lips ghosted closer, the barest brush against Derek's mouth. "I think I can claim you." And then he kissed him. It was not gentle. Luther's mouth pressed firm, insistent, a possession disguised as intimacy. Cold and heat clashed in the contact. Derek's body stiffened, then betrayed him, leaning into the kiss before his mind caught up. A sound escaped his throat, half growl, half gasp. His hands shot up, gripping Luther's shoulders, unsure whether to push him away or drag him closer. When Luther finally pulled back, crimson eyes gleamed with triumph. "There," he murmured. "The first truth you've allowed yourself in years." Derek sat frozen, breath ragged, lips tingling from the kiss. His body trembled with rage, confusion, and something darker he dared not name. "Get out," he whispered hoarsely. Luther's smile widened. "As you wish." He stepped back, dissolving into shadow as though he had never been there. Only the lingering taste of smoke and iron on Derek's lips remained, cruel proof that it had not been a dream. Derek buried his face in his hands. His chest heaved as he tried to steady himself. But no matter how hard he tried, the memory of that kiss would not fade. And worse, he already craved more. The council hall of Crescent Moon Pack buzzed with restless energy. Torches hissed against the damp stone walls, their light casting jagged shadows across the chamber. The elders sat stiff and silent at the long table, their silver hair glinting under the flames, while warriors lined the room's edges, their growls barely restrained. Whispers churned like storm winds, sharp and venomous. Rumors of a treaty with vampires had spread like wildfire. None of them had come willingly. Derek stood in the back, arms folded across his chest, eyes fixed on nothing. He hadn't wanted to come. He'd stopped wanting a long time ago, but Elias had summoned him, and ignoring an alpha's call was not an option. Pack business was pack business, even if he no longer belonged. At the front of the hall, Elias rose from his chair, broad shoulders cutting a commanding figure in the firelight. He lifted one hand, and the growls tapered into uneasy silence. His presence was magnetic, an alpha who had mastered the art of control. "We are at war with rogues," Elias said, his voice filling the chamber. "Our borders are bleeding. Our people grow weaker with every passing moon. We cannot fight on all sides. A treaty with the vampiric court will secure us." The words struck like a slap. Outrage rippled instantly. Warriors snarled, elders slammed fists on the table. One elder, his beard white as frost, rose to his feet. "They are monsters," he spat, "parasites who drain the life from the living. You would let them into our lands." Elias's gaze sharpened, steel and fire in his eyes. "Better parasites than corpses." His voice rose above the noise, commanding. "We will not survive without allies." The defiance ebbed, though hatred still simmered in every glare. Wolves were proud, stubborn. Vampires were the ancient enemy. This was unthinkable. In the shadows, Derek's jaw clenched. He understood Elias's logic, even admired his courage for daring what no alpha before him had. But still, vampires? Wolves hated them, feared them. His stomach twisted with the thought. And then the great doors groaned open. A gust of cold air swept through the hall as a figure entered, moving with predatory grace. Shadows seemed to lean toward him, bending like obedient servants. Crimson eyes gleamed in the firelight, cutting through the hostility with terrifying calm. The room stilled at once. Even the warriors' growls died in their throats. Luther, the vampire lord. Derek's stomach lurched violently. He had not expected this. Not him. Not here. Every instinct in the council screamed danger. Wolves shifted uneasily, hackles raised, breaths shallow. The elders' knuckles whitened against the table, as though preparing for a fight they could not win. Yet Luther only smiled, his lips curving with practiced charm, as if he stood among old friends. His voice was smooth velvet over steel when he spoke. "I come in good faith," he said, bowing his head slightly. "For peace." The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and suffocating. His gaze swept slowly across the chamber, drinking in the hostility, savoring it. And then it landed on Derek. For the briefest of moments, the world narrowed. The vampire lord's lips curved. Not the polite smile he had given the others, but something sharper, secretive. A recognition, promise. Derek's heart thundered against his ribs, every instinct screaming at him to look away. And yet he couldn't. He wasn't sure what terrified him more, the vampire lord's presence in this sacred hall, or the fact that, for a fleeting second, it felt like Luther had come not for the council, but for him. The council chamber was stifling with tension. Yet when Luther sat opposite Elias at the long stone table, a strange calm fell over the hall. The vampire lord leaned back in his chair as though he were in his own court, fingers steepled, crimson eyes bright but unthreatening. "Your territory is vast," Luther began, his voice silk with an edge of steel. "Yet even vast lands bleed when cut deep. My people have no interest in conquering what is yours. We want peace, trade, mutual protection." Elias studied him carefully, the alpha mask never slipping. He was young, but the crown fit him well. There was no hesitation in his bearing. "And what would the vampiric court give in return for this protection?" he asked, tone level but sharp. Luther smiled faintly. "What you need most. Reinforcements. We are not plagued by rogues as you are. Our soldiers do not tire, nor do they break so easily." His gaze flicked briefly to the warriors along the wall, their hackles rising at the insult. "A single battalion from my court could fortify your borders within a night." The elders exchanged uneasy glances. One muttered, "And what price would you demand, blood drinker?" Luther didn't so much as flinch. "Recognition. Passage across Crescent Moon territory for trade and diplomacy. And the end of this tedious hostility. That is all." Elias leaned forward, fingers drumming against the table. "No taking from our people. No feeding within our borders. Break that, and the treaty breaks with it." "Agreed." Luther inclined his head, as if the demand were only natural. "I have no need to hunt what is not freely given." A ripple of shock spread through the room. Negotiations were never supposed to go this smoothly. Derek, standing in the shadows of the back wall, felt his throat tighten. He should have felt relief. Elias was holding his ground, proving himself a capable alpha, but all Derek could think of was the way Luther carried himself. Calm, assured, a predator pretending at civility. And every so often, those crimson eyes drifted toward him, pulling at something deep in his chest he didn't want to acknowledge. The meeting stretched on, points exchanged, lines drawn, but when at last Elias declared, "We will draft terms tonight," the chamber broke into reluctant murmurs. No one clapped, no one cheered, but there was no open rebellion either. For a wolf pack, that was victory. The elders filed out stiffly, warriors grumbling under their breath as they returned to their posts. Elias lingered at the table, rubbing the bridge of his nose, tension bleeding from his shoulders now that the performance was done. Derek slipped into the corridor, glad for the cool night air that swept through the open windows. He needed space to breathe, to still the pounding in his chest. Negotiations were over, but the unease lingered. "Derek!" The voice froze him. Abel stood a few paces away, moonlight catching in his pale hair. Even now, the sight of him stirred something sharp in Derek's chest, longing laced with bitter memory. Abel's gaze softened, concern flickering there. "You look tired," Abel said gently. "These meetings must be hard for you." Derek forced a small smile, though it felt brittle. "I don't even belong here, but Elias summoned me." "That doesn't mean you don't matter," Abel replied quickly, stepping closer. His hand almost lifted, as if to touch Derek's arm, but he stopped himself. "I never meant to hurt you, Derek. Things just changed." The words stabbed deeper than they should have. Derek turned his face away, swallowing hard. "You don't owe me explanations, Abel. You made your choice." Abel began, but the words died when a low growl cut through the corridor. Both men turned. Elias stood at the far end of the hall, his eyes glowing faint gold, his jaw tight. He had seen enough to twist the scene into something it was not. For a moment, silence reigned, thick and dangerous. Abel shifted nervously under the weight of the alpha's glare. Derek's stomach dropped. He knew that look in his brother's eyes. Jealousy. Elias stepped forward, the air around him bristling with authority. His voice was low, laced with steel. "Abel, with me." Abel's throat bobbed. "Elias, it's not what it..." Now, the corridor grew colder. the tension unbearable. Derek opened his mouth to speak, but Elias's gaze sliced to him, a warning unspoken. Stay out of this. Abel hesitated, then followed Elias reluctantly down the hall, leaving Derek standing in the moonlight, heart pounding with dread. He knew this wouldn't end quietly. Elias's temper was a wildfire, and Abel had just walked straight into its path. And Derek had a sinking feeling he was about to be dragged into the flames. Abel hesitated, then followed Elias reluctantly down the hall. Derek's pulse thundered, his feet rooted to the floor. He should walk away. He should let it go. But instinct drove him after them, quiet as shadow. They stopped just beyond the corner, where torchlight painted the walls in restless gold. Elias rounded on Abel, the alpha mask falling away, leaving only raw fury. What were you doing with him? Elias snapped, voice low but seething. Abel stiffened. We were talking. Elias's lip curled, his eyes flashing wolf-bright. That didn't look like talking. I told you before, you are mine, my mate. Yet every time I turn, I find you with him. It's not like that, Abel protested, though his voice wavered. I care about him, Elias. He's your brother. He's hurting. My brother is nothing. Elias cut in, his words sharp as claws. He's not a wolf. He's not an alpha. He's a shadow clinging to what he's lost. The words landed like a blade in Derek's chest. He pressed himself against the cold stone wall, hidden, breath ragged. Abel's expression hardened, shoulders squaring. Don't you dare say that. Derek is more than you give him credit for. He has worth, even if you refuse to see it. Elias snarled, stepping closer, the raw edge of his dominance pressing heavy in the narrow hall. Careful, Abel. You're defending him too much. Makes me wonder if your loyalty lies with your alpha or... His gaze flicked dangerously. With him. Abel flinched but didn't back down. You think love is possession, Elias. But it's not. You can't cage me and call it devotion. That broke the last thread of Elias's restraint. With a guttural growl, he slammed Abel back against the wall, fists gripping his tunic. The torchlight trembled with the violence of it. Derek nearly stepped forward then, instinct screaming at him to intervene, but Elias's earlier warning echoed in his mind. Stay out of this. His chest ached as he watched Abel's face twist, not with fear, but with anger. Do you love him? Elias demanded, breath harsh, golden eyes blazing. Abel met his gaze with trembling defiance. I don't belong to you like that, Elias. Not the way you want. The silence that followed was sharp, deadly. Elias's jaw clenched, his knuckles white against Abel's chest. For a heartbeat, Derek thought his brother might strike him. But Elias only shoved him back, hard enough to leave Abel breathless. He turned on his heel, his fury a storm barely contained, and strode down the hall without another word. Abel slid down the wall, chest heaving, eyes glassy. Derek remained frozen in the shadows, torn between stepping forward and staying hidden. His throat burned with the weight of it. For the first time, Derek realized this was no longer about a broken alpha or a lost mate. This was a fire that would consume them all, and the sparks had just been lit. The great hall of Crescent Moon Pack gleamed with polished stone and banners of silver and blue, but the air was heavy, charged with unease. Elders sat rigid in their seats, warriors lined the walls, and in the center of it all, Elias stood tall at the head table. Tonight was meant to seal the treaty. Wolves and vampires, side by side. A spectacle no one could have imagined only weeks ago. Luther sat across from Elias, draped in black velvet, crimson eyes unreadable as ever. Every movement of his was smooth, deliberate, like a panther at rest. The vampire court had sent a dozen nobles with him, their pale faces masks of polite disdain. The wolves shifted uncomfortably at their presence, claws itching for reasons to tear throats. Derek kept to the side, close enough to observe, far enough not to draw attention. He wasn't sure why Elias had summoned him for this night. Perhaps a show of family unity, perhaps mockery. Either way, the weight of eyes on him burned. Elias's voice carried strong across the chamber. The Crescent Moon Pack recognizes the vampiric court as ally. We will honor trade and safe passage as agreed. The words drew a chorus of mutters. Elders exchanged stiff nods, though none looked pleased. Luther inclined his head in return, voice velvet smooth. And the court pledges aid. Our soldiers will guard your borders. Our strength will reinforce yours. A bond forged in shadow and moonlight. The formalities continued, but Derek barely heard them. His gaze drifted across the room to Abel. Abel stood proudly near Elias, his mate, his chosen Omega. He looked radiant beneath the torchlight, his silver hair like spun frost. For a moment, Abel's eyes flicked toward Derek, soft with something almost like regret. Derek dropped his gaze instantly, the old wound too raw. But Elias noticed. The shift in his brother's posture was subtle, shoulders tightening, jaw clenching. Derek recognized it instantly. The slow ignition of a firestorm. Then, a vampire broke the rhythm. It was Lord Malachi, an elder of the court, pale and sharp-featured, with a cruel mouth that never seemed to truly smile. His gaze swept the room lazily until it landed on Derek, lingering there with unnerving interest. "And what of him?" Malachi asked suddenly, his voice smooth but cutting. His long fingers gestured toward the shadows where Derek stood. "The quiet one. I have seen him lingering at these talks, though he is no alpha, no elder. Who is he to you?" The chamber stirred. Eyes turned to Derek, whispers rising like gnats. Derek stiffened under the scrutiny. Elias' jaw tightened. "He is no one," he said flatly. The words hit harder than a fist. Derek's breath caught, heat crawling up his neck, but he forced himself not to move, not to react. Malachi arched a brow, clearly enjoying the ripple his question had caused. "No one? Strange. He carries himself differently, almost untamed." His crimson eyes narrowed, predatory curiosity gleaming. "Perhaps he has value your pack does not see." The council murmured louder now. Wolves shifted uncomfortably, bristling at the vampire's insinuation. That was when Elias snapped. "He has no value." Elias' voice cracked like thunder, echoing off the stone walls. His fists slammed onto the table, making even some warriors flinch. "He is weak, a disgrace to this pack. Nothing more than a shadow clinging to my name. Do not mistake him for anything else." The room fell to stunned silence. Derek stood frozen, every muscle rigid, his heart pounding like it would split his ribs. He had expected many things from his brother over the years. Resentment, anger, dismissal. But not this. Not before everyone. The vampire's lips curved in knowing smirks. The wolves avoided Derek's eyes, shame and discomfort flickering across their faces. And from his seat at the far side, Luther watched in silence. His crimson gaze never wavered from Derek's face, burning with something unreadable, something that felt like both fury and promise. The chamber emptied slowly, the echoes of Elias' outburst still clinging to the stone walls. Wolves filed out in uneasy silence, some casting pitying glances at Derek, others looking away as if the shame might cling to them if they lingered too long. The vampires, however, left with smirks tugging at their pale lips, whispers like daggers hidden behind silk. Derek remained where he stood, rooted to the shadows, chest tight and burning. He had kept his face stone still during the humiliation, but inside he felt hollowed out, stripped bare. He waited until the last wolf had gone before moving, his steps heavy, as though he were walking through water. His hand brushed the doorway, then froze. Someone else was still here. "Your brother has a sharp tongue," a smooth voice drawled, "sharper than his judgment." Derek's head snapped up. Luther stepped from the far end of the chamber, unhurried, every line of him calm in a way that unnerved. His crimson eyes burned, not with mockery like the others, but with a cold, quiet fury. Derek swallowed, trying to steady himself. "If you've come to gloat, save your breath." Luther tilted his head, a faint curve to his lips. "Gloat? No. I have no interest in a wounded wolf licking his own blood." His gaze softened just slightly. I came because you don't deserve what was done to you. The words hit like an unexpected blow. Derek laughed bitterly, low and sharp. Don't I? He's my brother. He knows me better than anyone. If he says I'm worthless, maybe. Stop. The command cut through the air like steel. Luther had not raised his voice, but Derek fell silent all the same. You are not worthless. The vampire lord moved closer, his presence overwhelming yet strangely grounding. I saw how you stood there, how you held yourself even when he tried to break you. That kind of strength cannot be faked. Elias' anger is not truth. It is fear. Fear. Derek echoed, frowning. Yes. Luther's eyes glinted with dangerous amusement. Fear that someone else might see what he refuses to admit, that you are more than a shadow, that you could be more than him. Derek's breath caught, heat flooding his chest in a way that felt too close to dangerous. You don't know me. You don't know me, Derek whispered, though his voice trembled more than he wanted it to. No, Luther murmured, his tone velvet soft. But I intend to. He closed the space between them in one step, his hand suddenly curling around Derek's wrist. The touch was cool, startling, but firm. Derek instinctively tried to pull back, but Luther only tugged him closer, until Derek collided with the solid wall of the vampire lord's chest. Derek's breath stuttered. Luther's arm slipped around his back with predatory ease, holding him there as if he had every right to. The faint brush of cool breath ghosted across his ear when Luther leaned down, crimson eyes burning with something far too intense to name. You carry yourself as though you are small, Luther whispered, low and dangerous. But you are not. You are fire disguised as ash. Even your brother can feel it. Why else would he try so hard to crush you? Derek's heart hammered so violently he thought Luther must hear it. His wolf snarled beneath his skin, caught between instinctive fear and something heady, something that made his blood thrum. Let me go, he forced out, though his hands betrayed him by clutching at the fabric of Luther's coat instead of pushing away. Luther's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. Is that what you want, little wolf? His voice caressed the words, turning them into a dare. Derek's throat went dry. He couldn't speak, couldn't think. The air between them was too thick, charged with something dangerous, something forbidden. For a heartbeat, Luther's face dipped closer, his lips hovering just above Derek's temple, not quite touching. Derek shivered at the proximity, at the raw awareness that if Luther chose to close that gap, he wouldn't stop him. Then, with a deliberate slowness that felt like mockery and promise all at once, Luther released him. The absence of his touch was dizzying. Rest easy, Derek, Luther said softly, stepping back into the shadows, his voice carrying the weight of an oath. I do not forget insults, especially when they are spoken against those I care to protect. And then he was gone, leaving Derek trembling, breathless, and far too aware of the ache where Luther's hand had been. The council chamber felt different the next morning. Wolves filled the space with nervous energy, the scent of unease thick in the air. The treaty with the vampiric court was to be finalized, and no one trusted it. Not the elders, not the warriors, not the Omegas pressed along the walls. Elias sat at the head of the table, posture taut with alpha authority. Derek, as always, lingered at the edges, silent and half-forgotten. He told himself he didn't care, that he was used to being invisible. But when Luther entered, silence swallowed the room whole. The vampire lord moved like shadowed silk, every step a command without words. His crimson gaze swept across the gathered wolves, calm, patient, calculating. When it settled briefly on Derek, Derek's lungs forgot how to work. Luther inclined his head to Elias. Alpha Elias, I believe we have an agreement to seal. Elias nodded stiffly. Terms were laid. Reinforcements for borders. Safe passage. No feeding. Mutual defense. Yes. Luther's smile was faint, almost amused. And yet one thing remains. The room tensed. Elders leaned forward, hackles raised. Even Elias narrowed his eyes. And what is that? Luther rested his hands lightly on the table, his voice smooth, almost conversational. Marriage. The word struck the chamber like a blade. Growls erupted. Elders shouted over each other. Marriage? With a vampire? The insult, the outrage. It shook the hall like thunder. Elias slammed his hand on the table, silencing them all. His voice was sharp, incredulous. You dare? But Luther did not flinch. His crimson eyes gleamed, unyielding. You want peace that lasts? Then we must bind it in blood and vow. Your wolves hate us. My court distrusts you. Words can be broken, but marriage. His lips curved faintly. Marriage endures. Elias scoffed. You think I'd hand over one of my people like cattle? Not cattle. Luther's gaze shifted, burning, locking on Derek at the back of the hall. A choice. Him. The chamber froze. Every head turned. Derek's stomach dropped as though the floor had given way beneath him. Derek. Luther said his name like it was a promise, a possession, his voice thrumming low. He is strong, though he has yet to see it. He belongs nowhere here, yet everywhere he should. My court would honor him as no wolf has. Derek's pulse thundered. The room tilted. Me? His mind scrambled, but words wouldn't come. Elias stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. My brother. The gold glow of his eyes flared. You insult me, bloodsucker. He is broken. Useless. You think you can shame me by demanding him? Luther only tilted his head, smiling faintly. On the contrary, I offer him respect, protection, a crown should he want it. He would be wasted here. The hall bristled. Warriors shifted uneasily. Elders whispered harshly. And Derek felt a pull he didn't want to admit. The weight of Luther's gaze held him captive. And in that look, there was no pity, no disgust, no broken, only recognition. Elias's fists clenched. His voice came out rough, biting. Take him then, if you want the burden so badly. He is nothing to me. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Derek's heart splintered. Luther's smile sharpened, victory and promise gleaming in his crimson eyes. Done. His gaze slid back to Derek, softer now, intimate in a way that made Derek's breath catch. Then let it be known, the vampiric court and Crescent Moon Pack are bound. By treaty, by vow, by him. The chamber erupted in chaos, but Derek barely heard it. His brother's words still rang in his ears, hollow and cruel, while Luther's promise whispered against his skin like fire. And deep down, against all reason, a part of him wanted to see where this dangerous path would lead. The chamber had emptied long ago, leaving only the faint echoes of murmurs and the oppressive residue of the treaty signing. The torches along the walls flickered unevenly, casting long shadows across the stone floor. Derek lingered at the far edge, his back pressed against the cold, rough surface of the wall. His chest ached, his heart pounding with a mixture of shame, anger, and disbelief. He had survived ridicule before, whispers, sideways glances, and snide jokes, but nothing had prepared him for the deliberate, cutting humiliation that had come from his own brother, Elias, in front of the entire pack. Every word, every gesture, every flick of Elias's golden gaze had been a blade, and Derek felt shredded in its wake. Presence made him stiffen, the familiar warmth and power in the air, now sharp with anger and tension. Elias. You, Elias said, his voice sharp, almost slicing through the quiet corridor. His golden eyes gleamed like molten metal in the torchlight, and the alpha aura radiating off him crackled like storm clouds gathering before a lightning strike. Derek forced himself to stand taller, to mask the tremor in his hands. What do you want? His voice was quieter than he intended, fragile, but steady. What do I want? Elias echoed, voice rising, charged with jealousy and fury. Do you have any idea what it's like? Watching you drift in the shadows, watching everyone notice him. Abel. While you linger there, doing nothing, stealing glances, pulling attention without even trying. Derek's stomach dropped. The world seemed to tilt slightly. You humiliated me in front of the council because I stood near Abel? Elias's jaw tightened, his stance widening as he stepped closer, towering over Derek with the weight of his anger. His fists clenched at his sides. Yes, do you know what it looks like? How it feels to watch your mate. My mate. Look at you, linger on you, almost noticing you more than he notices me. You don't even have a wolf. You're nothing. And yet somehow everyone, every single one of them still gives you attention. Gives you importance. Derek's chest tightened until it felt like his ribs were being crushed. And so you thought it was your right to strip me of whatever respect I had left? His voice trembled, a whisper of pain cutting through the tension. Elias's glare hardened, unrelenting. I had to. Someone had to put you in your place before everyone else saw how useless you really are. I am the alpha. I cannot let him make you look stronger than you are. Derek's hands shook at his sides, and beneath his skin, his wolf whimpered, restless and wounded. You're my brother. You should have protected me, he said softly, the words thick with betrayal. Protected you? Elias barked, stepping so close that Derek could feel the heat radiating off him. From what? From reality? From the truth? That you're weaker than everyone here? That no one respects you? That Abel, my mate, could ever want to notice you? Derek felt the weight of the world press down on his shoulders. His chest felt hollow, his knees weak. He wanted to collapse against the wall, to sink into the cold stone. But his pride, fragile as it was, kept him standing. He had once believed Elias would shield him, would fight for him even when he was broken. But that illusion was gone, shattered by jealousy, pride, and cruelty. Elias's shoulders sagged for the briefest of moments, a flicker of regret in his golden eyes. I didn't want to hurt you this much, he admitted quietly, voice almost drowned by the echo of his earlier rage. But then his jaw set, the alpha mask sliding back into place like armor. I cannot undo what's done. The council saw it. The pack saw it. And Luther has claimed you. That cannot be undone. You should know that before you walk away. Derek swallowed hard, pain stabbing through him like ice and fire mixed together. I know, he whispered. His voice broke, but he forced it steady. I just thought you were my brother. Elias's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, but duty and anger hardened it again. I am the alpha. I did what I had to do. That is all. Derek turned slowly, each movement heavy with despair. Shoulders trembling, he walked down the corridor, the echo of his brother's cruelty clinging to him like a shadow. Every step was weighted with the bitter realization that some bonds, no matter how deep once, could not be mended. Not today, not ever. The torchlight flickered across the walls, casting long, distorted shadows, and Derek felt every inch of his old life fall away. Elias's betrayal had left a wound that no apology could heal, and no explanation could soothe. The council chamber was thick with tension, every wolf in the room standing or sitting stiffly, their muscles taut as bowstrings. The treaty with the vampiric court had been finalized, yet the air remained heavy with distrust, fear, and simmering resentment. The stone walls echoed faint murmurs, voices rising and falling like restless wind, and Derek felt every glance directed his way as though it scorched his skin. He lingered near the back, pressed against the cold, uneven stone, shoulders squared though his chest felt as if it were being crushed. His heart hammered in his ribs, each beat echoing the sting of last night's confrontation with Elias. Bitter words, sharp accusations, a humiliation he had not seen coming. It all replayed in his mind, relentless, unforgiving. And now he had no choice but to face what came next. At the head of the table, Elias sat rigid, his posture flawless, jaw tight, eyes glowing faint gold. He refused to meet Derek's gaze, staring straight ahead as though Derek were a shadow on the floor rather than his own blood. Derek's chest tightened at the sight. Even after everything, the cruelty, the jealousy, the public shaming, he had hoped for the smallest flicker of brotherly concern. But there was none, only a rigid, cold authority, pride, and silent judgment that cut deeper than any insult ever could. Across the room, Abel lingered near the doors, his pale hair catching the torchlight, glinting almost like silver. His eyes found Derek's, wide and filled with something like sympathy, and Derek felt a pang twist sharply in his chest. Abel had loved him once, had cared for him, and in that fleeting glance, Derek understood the warmth had not completely faded, but it was powerless now, eclipsed by the decisions that had already been made, by the chains of politics and desire that bound him to Luther. At the center of the chamber, Luther sat perfectly composed, the very embodiment of predatory elegance. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture effortless. His crimson eyes swept the room with a precision that unsettled even the most seasoned elders, calculating, piercing. And when they landed on Derek, the slow, knowing smile that curved his lips made Derek's stomach coil with a mixture of fear and yearning. Every fiber of him screamed in contradictory warning and longing. Alpha Elias. Luther's voice broke the murmurs, smooth and commanding. He rose from his seat with fluid grace, the sound alone silencing every whisper. The treaty is settled. Borders are secured. Protection will be guaranteed. Elias's jaw tightened further. He said nothing, but the tension radiating off him made the air in the chamber seem almost electrically charged. Luther's gaze swept deliberately over the council, lingering just long enough on the elders and warriors to establish his dominance, before returning to Derek. The weight of that stare pressed down on him, making it impossible to think of anything else. Derek's throat went dry, and he could feel heat climbing his neck, a flush creeping across his chest and face. He forced himself to remain still, to not betray the storm of desire and terror curling within him. I believe, Luther continued, his voice low, deliberate, and threaded with an almost dangerous intimacy. I put forward another condition yesterday, yet to receive the decision. The chamber seemed to shrink around Derek, the air thick, heavy, oppressive, yet charged with something electric that had nothing to do with the council. He could feel the pulse of power from Luther, the subtle warmth and scent that enveloped him, smoky, magnetic, intoxicating. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the remnants of fear, humiliation, and old insecurities, something stirred. Recognition, power, a pull he had never felt before, raw and undeniable. Step by step, almost hypnotically, Derek moved forward. His voice trembled at first, but he forced it firm, unwavering. I agree. The chamber froze. A ripple of whispers swirled like dry leaves in a storm. Elders blinked in shock, some mouths opening and closing, disbelief etched across their faces. Abel's lips pressed into a thin, tight line, sorrow and regret contorting his features. Derek's chest ached as their eyes met for a brief heartbeat, a silent farewell to what had been. Elias's golden eyes burned, rivulets of anger and humiliation radiating from him, but he refused to meet Derek's gaze, staring instead at the far wall as though that was the only place he could safely hold his authority without shattering. Luther's smile deepened, predatorily, a satisfaction that sent a shiver down Derek's spine. Without warning, Luther crossed the space between them in a single, fluid stride. Before anyone could react, his hands gripped Derek's waist, pulling him tightly against his chest. Derek's breath hitched. The heat of Luther's body pressed into him, a seductive, inescapable claim. Every nerve ending sparked as the smoky, intoxicating scent of the vampire flooded his senses. From this moment, Luther whispered, voice low, silk and shadow, lips brushing Derek's ear, "You are mine." And then, in a bold public claim that silenced even the murmurs of the council, Luther pressed his lips to Derek's. Time slowed, the world narrowing to the heat of his touch, the taste of him, the undeniable, unchallengeable assertion of ownership. Shock rippled through the chamber. Wolves growled, jaws tightened, some stared in disbelief, while Derek's knees threatened to buckle beneath the intensity of the moment. When Luther pulled back, crimson eyes blazing and unyielding, he addressed the council, voice cold, commanding, final. The ceremony will be held in 3 days' time. Prepare accordingly. This bond is not negotiable. Elias's hands clenched at his sides, golden eyes flashing with fury, shame, and impotence. He refused to meet Derek's gaze. Abel's pale hand balled into a fist, sorrow and helplessness contorting his delicate features. Derek's chest rose and fell sharply, his body still alive with the aftershock of Luther's touch. Beneath it all, a storm of shame, resignation, and something darker, desire, recognition, belonging, roared to life within him. He had agreed, and from this moment, the trajectory of his life would be irreversibly altered. The council murmurs dwindled into uneasy silence. Derek stood at the center of the chamber, claimed, exposed, and unmistakably marked before the eyes of everyone he had ever known. And for the first time in his life, he realized that yielding to someone's control, allowing himself to be utterly powerless, could also be intoxicating, dangerous, and make him feel more alive than he ever had before. The morning sun had barely pierced the dense canopy outside when Derek stepped into the courtyard, shoulders tense, eyes wary. Every movement, every breath felt under scrutiny. Whispers followed him like a trail of shadow, the wolves' judgmental eyes fixed on him with a sharpness that burned. Even the youngest apprentices glanced at him and recoiled slightly, as though proximity carried some contamination. He could hear snippets of murmured conversations. "Did you see him? Claimed by a vampire, and in front of the council, no less. Luther's chosen. What does that even mean?" Derek kept his head high, jaw tight. He had walked through ridicule, humiliation, and even Elias's venom, but the relentless stare still cut deep, raw as a fresh wound. He felt exposed, small, yet he refused to look away. It was almost ironic how differently the vampires treated him. When he stepped into the court of the vampiric court later that day, he was met with courtesy, attention, and respect that contrasted sharply with the cold glances of his own kind. Servants bowed slightly, lords and ladies inclined their heads with polite deference, and even the youngest vampires observed him with a quiet curiosity. "You have the presence of an alpha," one elder vampire remarked softly as he handed Derek a goblet of dark wine, eyes lingering a fraction too long. "Even unclaimed, one could see it in you." Derek's stomach fluttered, uncomfortable at the praise. He had never been seen like this before, never by anyone except perhaps Luther, and it unsettled him in ways he hated to admit. And then, there was Luther. He seemed to appear everywhere, at impossible times, as though the shadows themselves bent to his will. One moment Derek would be alone in a sunlit corridor, trying to savor the rare taste of privacy. The next, Luther's presence was there, near enough to feel the warmth of his body, close enough that Derek's pulse betrayed him. "You look tense," Luther murmured one afternoon as Derek walked along the balcony, the city sprawling below. Derek froze, almost knocking over a railing. I'm fine," he stammered, though his muscles remembered the press of Luther's body too vividly to be convincing. Luther stepped closer, too close, and Derek felt the heat radiate from him. His hand brushed against Derek's lower back, almost imperceptibly, but it sent a jolt through him that he hated to admit he liked. Derek's jaw clenched, a sharp inhale catching in his throat. "Relax," Luther whispered, fingers ghosting down his spine. "You are mine now, and they will see that in time." Derek wanted to jerk away, to create space between them, but some part of him, an unspoken, forbidden part, relished the contact. He hated himself for it, hated the thrill, the awareness of Luther's dominance pressing in, but the ache in his chest and the fire that ignited in his blood made him clench his fists at his sides instead of resisting outright. The wolves continued to watch him from afar, gossiping, their stares unyielding. Yet the vampires treated him with respect, even indulgence. Lessons in court etiquette, the subtleties of negotiation, the ritualistic gestures of power, all became a daily curriculum. Derek learned quickly. It was impossible not to under the weight of the court's scrutiny. But always Luther was there, watching, waiting, testing, occasionally pressing his claim in subtle, irrepressible ways. A hand brushing along Derek's arm, a sudden grip at his waist, a brush of lips along his temple in private that left him shivering. Every time, Derek pulled away or tried to, but the briefest flashes of heat lingered, coiling in his belly, a secret thrill he would never admit aloud. One evening, as the sun bled into twilight and the courtyard shadows grew long, Derek found himself alone at the edge of the garden. He exhaled shakily, muscles tensing and relaxing in equal measure, when Luther appeared from the darkened archway like a predator stepping from the shadows. "You are restless?" Luther murmured, moving closer, until Derek could feel his warmth on the back of his neck, the press of his chest nearly against him. I need air," Derek said, trying to keep his voice steady, trying to mask the way his chest betrayed him, the way his pulse surged at the contact. "You need me?" Luther countered softly, and before Derek could deny it, his hands were at Derek's hips, pulling him tightly against him. The world narrowed to the press of his body, the intoxicating scent, the warmth, the undeniable dominance. Derek's mind screamed no, yet the ache in his chest, the fire that only Luther could ignite, made him tremble in ways he had never allowed himself to feel. Luther's lips hovered near Derek's ear. "You can resist me or you can give in. But know this, I will always find you." Derek swallowed hard, his stomach twisting. He wanted to push away. He wanted to run. And yet, he couldn't deny the sharp, dark pleasure that roared through him, the fear and desire mingling into a heady, unbearable tension. That night, as he lay alone in his chambers under the pale moonlight, Derek's mind kept replaying the day, the wolves' whispers, the vampire's courtesy, and Luther's relentless, impossible presence. He hated himself for wanting it, hated the way the memory of Luther's hands, his heat, and his gaze coiled around him like smoke. But deep down, a part of him, perhaps the part that had always been broken, unnoticed, and powerless, knew that he would never be able to escape it. And secretly, he didn't want to. The corridors of the Crescent Moon Keep were unusually silent that evening, the only sound the soft flicker of torches along the stone walls. Derek moved carefully, every step measured, his mind still reeling from the day's council meeting and the weight of his public claim. Elias followed at a distance, though not close enough to intervene. He had wanted to check on Derek, wanted to make sure his brother was all right. That was the most he could do. Not now. Not while Luther, the vampire lord, loomed over his brother like a shadow made flesh. Every time Luther brushed against Derek, pressed him close, or whispered silk-soft words, Elias felt his blood boil, with anger, regret, and helplessness. He hated the sight, hated that Derek's trembling response, the flush creeping up his neck, the subtle shiver at Luther's touch, was clear to anyone paying attention. I shouldn't have humiliated him," Elias muttered under his breath, pacing in the corridor. He doesn't deserve this. Not like this." But there was nothing he could do. Derek was already claimed. The pack had seen it. Luther's dominance was undeniable, and any interference would only provoke the vampire's wrath, a wrath Elias could not match. Meanwhile, Derek had slipped into a quieter wing of the keep, seeking solitude, when a familiar voice called softly behind him. "Derek?" Abel's pale form emerged from the shadows, hesitant, eyes filled with sorrow and longing. Derek stiffened, forcing himself to remain calm. "What do you want?" he asked, voice low though not cold. Abel stepped closer, but kept his distance. I need to say this, just once, and then I'll leave you to him, to all of this." He swallowed hard. "I loved you, Derek. I still do. Long before the moon goddess. Long before this. Before everything." Derek's chest tightened. He wanted to look away, to push Abel aside, but something in the raw vulnerability of his expression caught him. You loved me?" Derek asked quietly, voice barely more than a whisper. Abel nodded, lips trembling. "Yes, I wanted you to be mine, but the moon goddess, she chose Elias for me, and you were always meant to be out of reach." His voice cracked, guilt and sorrow mingling in every word. "I never meant to hurt you, Derek. I just had no choice." Derek shook his head, stepping back, anger and pain flaring alongside a deep, raw hurt. "Abel, I can't. I'm not. I'm his. I've already agreed. There's nothing you can do. Abel's eyes filled with unshed tears, his pale hands shaking. I needed you to know. I had to tell you even if. He stopped abruptly as the temperature shifted. From the shadowed archway, Luther emerged silently, crimson eyes glinting with unreadable emotion. The moment Abel looked at Derek, the vampire's gaze snapped to him, searing and possessive. You? Luther said, voice low, deadly, and full of barely contained fury. Step away from him. Abel staggered back instinctively, fear flashing in his eyes. Luther's body moved like a predator, cutting off every possible escape, his aura coiling around Derek in a protective, possessive barrier. I. Abel stammered, panic overtaking him. I didn't. Luther's crimson eyes narrowed, lips curving with controlled menace. Do not touch him. Speak to him. Stand there and regret it. The weight of his presence was suffocating. Abel took a hesitant step back, finally realizing he was utterly outmatched, and retreated into the shadows, pale and shaken. Derek, meanwhile, felt the heat of Luther's body close behind him, the vampire's hand sliding possessively along his waist. His pulse raced, heart hammering, a mixture of fear, arousal, and dizzying relief flooding him. You see? Luther whispered, lips brushing the shell of Derek's ear. He forgets who you belong to, but I will not. Derek's breath caught. The humiliation, the desire, the shame, and the thrill of being claimed crashed together, leaving him trembling in Luther's hold. For the first time, he didn't pull away. He didn't fight. Instead, he leaned into Luther's chest, letting the fire of the vampire's claim wash over him. Luther's hand slid lower, brushing possessively along Derek's back, pressing him flush. Every nerve in Derek's body screamed, both resistance and longing, but he allowed himself, for the first time, to respond. Crimson eyes locked on his, Luther's lips pressed to his with a possessive, heated claim, and Derek finally answered, lips parting, hands clutching at the vampire's coat as the tension he had carried for weeks erupted into something raw, dangerous, and undeniable. Elias, unseen in the corridor's shadows, ground his teeth. Regret and helplessness battled within him. He had wanted to protect his brother, to shield him, but he had no power here. The vampire's claim was absolute, and for the first time he realized the weight of what he had done, the humiliation, the public ownership, and the complete surrender of Derek to Luther. The corridors echoed with silence once more, except for Derek's rapid breaths, Luther's whispered possessive murmurs, and the distant, retreating footsteps of a defeated Abel. Derek clung to Luther's chest, heart hammering, cheeks flushed, and for the first time, he allowed himself to feel it all, the fear, the shame, the burning, intoxicating heat of belonging. And in that moment he understood. There was no turning back.